Air tragedy strikes again, this time very close to home. I'm Michael Smerconish here in Philadelphia. A medical jet carrying 6 people crashed into a Philly neighborhood, causing a massive explosion that affected nearby homes and vehicles. The small plane was carrying a pediatric patient and her mother, along with 4 crew members, a pilot, co-pilot, doctor, and medic. At this time, authorities cannot confirm any survivors from the crash. We're awaiting a news conference, perhaps this hour, from here in Philadelphia. As we get updates, we'll bring them to you. This all coming after the tragic Blackhawk and American Airlines collision that killed 67 people near Reagan National Airport on Wednesday night. A chilling collision above the Potomac, upended after the consoler-in-chief pivoted and began playing the blame game and speculating while providing no evidence that diversity and hiring policies of prior administrations somehow caused this tragedy.
The FAA's website states they include hearing, vision, missing extremities, partial paralysis, complete paralysis, epilepsy, severe intellectual disability, psychiatric disability, and dwarfism all qualify for the position of a controller of airplanes. The FAA website shows that the agency's guidance on diversity hiring were last updated on March 23rd of 22. They wanted to make it even more so. And then I came in, and I assume maybe this is the reason. The FAA, which is overseen by Secretary Pete Buttigieg, a real winner.
Remember now, the effort had just changed from rescue to recovery. Bodies were still being pulled out of the Potomac when he said that. Caitlin Collins then pressed the president.
Even yet know the names of the 67 people who were killed, and you are blaming Democrats and DEI policies and air traffic control and seemingly the member of the U.S. military who was flying that Blackhawk helicopter. Don't you think you're getting ahead of the investigation right now?
No, I don't think so at all. I don't think with the names of the people, you mean the names of the people that are on the plane, you think that's going to make a difference?
Despite any evidence supporting his conjecture, the president doubled down, and with the support of the vice president, the secretary of defense, the secretary of transportation, he produced a shiny object, DEI, which dominated the Thursday news cycle. Debate over DEI now filled airspace that would otherwise have been focused on the confirmation hearings occurring that day on Capitol Hill, featuring the most controversial remaining nominees of President Trump. There was Tulsi Gabbard, tapped to be Trump's director of national intelligence, who refused to say whether or not she thinks Edward Snowden is a traitor. FBI Director nominee Kash Patel, who fielded questions about a retribution and enemies list. RFK Jr., Trump's nominee to be the next Secretary of Health and Human Services, seemed to struggle a bit when answering a basic question about Medicare. 3 nominees who could potentially be in charge of our security and health. They all took a back seat to a torrent of unproven rhetoric and speculation. That night, President Trump's unfounded speculation about DEI was welcomed on Fox News, and no doubt many Americans working jobs with limited bandwidth to verify their information, they went to bed thinking 67 people died because of a government initiative which they think discriminates against whites and had caused some unfit minority to get hired for a job, resulting in negligence and costing lives. I'm too cynical to accept coincidence. I think President Trump wanted to own the news cycle, like he wants to own every news cycle. And this time, he sought the added political benefit of raising questions over whether a minority was at fault for the D.C. catastrophe. It brings me to today's poll question at Smerconish.com. Do you believe President Trump's blaming of DEI for the Washington crash was a deliberate attempt to shift focus from the congressional confirmation hearings? And now, let me tell you a story of how caught in the ensuing crossfire was an American soldier, Jo Ellis. She's a service member who has dedicated her life to defending this country. Spent 15 years in the Virginia Army National Guard, is a chief warrant officer, a combat gunner, a UH-60 Blackhawk pilot. Jo is deployed to Iraq, Guatemala, and Kuwait. She's also a transgender woman who transitioned while in service and coincidentally once worked as the digital media manager for Smerconish.com. Now, go back to Monday. On Monday, President Trump signed an executive order directing newly confirmed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to implement a policy to come up with the means to preclude transgender personnel from the U.S. military, arguing that being transgender is not consistent with military ideals. When I read that, I invited Jo to be a guest on my SiriusXM radio program. On Tuesday, she wrote a moving piece about her experience. We published it on my website. And then on Wednesday, she joined me for a national radio interview on SiriusXM. It was that night that the tragedy occurred on the Potomac. And by Thursday night and Friday morning, Jo Ellis was falsely accused of piloting the Blackhawk helicopter that collided with the American Airlines jet. And then absolutely horrific headlines like this. Offensive, conspiracy-fueled tweets ensued that went viral. Jo Ellis was the #2 most trending topic in the United States on X late Friday morning with more than 90,000 posts, according to Trends24, a website that tracks trending topics. I suspect the visibility that came from the radio interview, along with the article we published at Smerconish.com, put Jo's name in play such that she became an easy target for some of the twisted voices that have outsized influence online. Jo became collateral damage, linked, blamed via high-speed internet to a tragedy with which she had nothing to do. Collateral in the president's unfounded theories and attempt to divert attention away from real conversations about who's going to lead our country and what truly happened in the crash. And now she'll forever represent a cautionary tale of how the combination of loose talk and trigger fingers on keypads can sully a person's reputation and subject them to online ridicule, scorn, and threats. Joining me now is Jo Ellis. Nice to see you, Jo. How did this all happen from your perspective? Where were you? What were you doing when you found that you were being blamed for the Washington catastrophe?
Thank you for having me, Michael. I want to reiterate that I'm speaking in a personal status, not representing the National Guard, U.S. Army, or Department of Defense. My heart goes out to the families of the victims, and they don't deserve these rumors. I learned of this at 4:30 a.m. Friday morning from a text message of a close friend that a bot account was commenting on his Facebook post asking if he knew Jo Ellis, who killed those people in the D.C. crash. Then someone sent me a link to a Pakistani newspaper article naming me in the crash. And then I received a Daily Mail phone call asking if I was alive and if I knew what was happening to me.
What sort of threats, what sort of ridicule, what sort of, pain have you been put through as a result of this process?
Well, Michael, I was not surprised by the hate. This is my reality. And now that I'm more visible, more comes. The false claims put me and my family at risk. I was surprised by the outpouring of love and support, though, from strangers all over the world sending me messages. And I believe love shines brighter than hate.
So I don't believe in coincidence. You know that about me. I see causal connection. I don't think that Jo Ellis would have been wrongly blamed for the D.C. catastrophe, but for the comments that the president made in that press conference where, without foundation, he tossed DEI into this conversation. What's your reaction?
My reaction, Michael, is that I've heard anecdotes from many of the trans communities saying that they have been targeted since the comments of the president, and their safety is at risk. And I am very fortunate from a very privileged position, but other people are not so much, and this is really putting people's lives at risk.
Relative to your backstory, I'm going to put on the screen some of what you wrote earlier in the week. I've had symptoms of what I now know to be gender dysphoria since I was 5 years old. I learned early to hide these symptoms from my family because I thought they meant I was a bad person. This led to healthy and not so healthy coping mechanisms. I thought that if I could just be more religious, more successful, more manly, that I would cure my condition. I got married, bought a house, helped raise a stepdaughter, played drums in the church band, adopted a dog, all the things I believed a good man should do. And I really wanted to do those things, but I also secretly hoped it would fix me. It didn't work. You come from a family with a rich tradition of military service. You know now that your future service is at risk. Speak to the controversy that surrounds whether transgender individuals such as yourself should be able to serve.
Well, I believe in a meritocracy, and I have met all of the standards to serve. I came out while it was allowed and part of policy. So I did what I believe was totally legal while serving, to come out and to serve openly. And in my mind, I still meet those standards today. And any deviation from the standard, it should be what decides if a person should be fit to serve or not. Changing the standards to target a very specific group is very different.
Jo, let's talk now about something you'd probably rather be addressing, which is your actual experience in flying helicopters. You know the corridor. You obviously were not involved in any flights there this week, but you know the corridor. Talk to me about your reaction to this catastrophe based on your knowledge.
Yes, Michael, I've flown those routes like many pilots. I've seen on the news many people speaking to this. I've always felt safe operating in that airspace thanks to the rigorous Army training that I've received and the helpful air traffic controllers that guided me along those corridors. I'm not an accident investigator, and I'm not really qualified to speak about the crash specifically.
Is it a particularly, I get that and I respect it, is it a particularly difficult area from your perspective as a helicopter pilot in which to fly as compared to other places you've been? You've flown all over the globe.
I would say that it is busy, like many areas that have busy airports. There's FAA training that is required to fly into those areas, and we take all the necessary precautions anytime we fly into that area.
What has been the reaction from those with whom you have served to A, your transition, and B, the way in which wrongly you were injected into this controversy this week?
Overwhelming support, Michael, from my battalion commander, from the Adjutant General of Virginia, from up and down, left and right of the ranks, from civilians, from veterans. I've received messages from South Africa, from places all over the world, supporting me and serving me allowing me to serve openly.
And finally, I described what happened to you, Jo, as a cautionary tale for all of us of how just someone who is in service, in your case, in service to their country, going about their private life, all of a sudden gets thrust into the public domain. In a prior era, you know, your injury to reputation would have been limited by how many voices could tell a story, whisper down the lane. But in this instance, when you were the #2 trending subject on X yesterday, it's all just a send key away. Final thought?
A final thought is my Army training has prepared me to handle the unexpected. And so I reacted in that way, and I made preparations and contacted the proper people to keep my family safe, to keep me safe. And nobody deserves this kind of false rumors and attention.
Jo Ellis, thank you. Thank you for your willingness to tell this story. I'm sorry it all happened to you this week.
Thank you, Michael.